Dobry dzień. Zaczynamy. This is actually a very difficult question to answer, so I'm going to start off with an example here. We have polyglot A and polyglot B. Both of them speak these languages at least at intermediate level. Good pronunciation, prosody, and accents. And they can read all the languages. One speaks 22 languages, the other 32. So what do these numbers mean in the following terms? Okay, overall or total difficulty of learning this set of languages. The total lexical, phonetic, and grammatical knowledge acquired in the process. The degree to which the language they've acquired helped learn other languages. First of all, we have to know what languages they speak to answer these questions. All right, here we go. So the first issues you might think would be, language versus dialect, and lexical and grammatical similarities. Fundamental notions such as language and dialect are primarily social. They're not linguistic constructs. They depend on society in very crucial ways. Now, linguists do make a distinction between language and dialect based on the concept of mutual intelligibility. When there are two languages where speakers can understand each other, they're considered dialects of the same language. Where they cannot understand each other, they're considered different languages. Well, we have the dialect continuum where speakers of A and B can speak together, and speakers of B and C can speak together, but A and C cannot. All right, now, Czech and Slovak, they're often considered different languages, but they can understand each other for the most part. Now, Serbian, Croatian. Slovene is my first Slavic language, but I didn't learn that much. I switched to Serbsko-Hrvatski, Serbo-Croatian. So this is in the 70s, at time of Tito. So as you see, it was political. So I have books to learn Serbo-Croatian. When we're looking at a list of languages spoken by a polyglot, it's important to consider the degree of mutual intelligibility. And that way we can judge the overall difficulty of this set in terms of acquisition. So, if there are two people both speak 10 languages, that's quite ambiguous. That leads us to language difficulty. You could say, which is harder, Polish or Spanish? It's easier for a Slovak learner to learn Polish than to learn Portuguese, right? Likewise, it's easier for a Portuguese speaker to learn Spanish than for a Slovak speaker. Polyglots is a very different situation. It depends on your total language repertoire. For example, a native speaker of English who knows Japanese at a high level can learn Korean much easier than a monolingual English speaker. Okay, so let's divide the question into four areas: lexicon, phonetic system, grammar, and the writing system. Even if we put in four categories, we still have a big issue with subjectivity. So obviously learning languages that have many cognates with languages you already know greatly facilitates passive recognition and acquisition. I mean, I can give you an example. The first time I heard Slovak, I understood it. I talked to Slovaks. I use a mix between Serbian, Croatian, Polish mainly. Russian didn't help much. There are various sites where you can get data on lexical similarity, but there are variations due to differing word lists. So, for example, lexical similarity between French and English is considerable in lexical fields relating to culture, whereas their similarity is smaller as far as basic function words, everyday words, are concerned. Another study estimates that the number of English words directly inherited from French at 41%, and 15% of other English words derived from Latin, putting English-French lexical similarity around 56%. Okay, you can also go look at charts like this. It's quite interesting. I find the Slavic group the most interesting because there's so much interesting lexical similarity as you go from east to west and north to south. I started off south, Serbian, Croatian, went north. I studied Slavic literature in Poland. Mainly I read in Russian, Polish, and Croatian. I bought a course in Ukrainian. I could understand most of it without really ever spending much time studying it. Now, this is important. Note that people do not have equal ability to understand cognates in other languages. A skill that you develop as you learn more and more diverse languages. You start to recognize them, because Hyperglot A has 10 more languages. And then I gave Hyperglot B 22, but strategically, it has a lot of languages which will help acquire the other ones, and that's what I'm talking about here. Okay, 18 of A's languages are Slavic, only 4 in the case of B. All right, then go to the Romance languages. So polyglot B has Spanish, French, and Romanian. And then going to Germanic, polyglot B has English, German, Norwegian, Dutch, Afrikaans, Danish, Swedish start to become easier. Now that polyglot B has just finished increasing its number, at least passive understanding, in all these new Slavic, Romance, and Germanic languages, HB is looking for new challenges. So all the languages I'm going to talk about now are not on polyglot A's list. HB can use knowledge of Chinese, Mandarin, and Japanese to learn Cantonese, and then Vietnamese and Korean. All right, now let's move on to some other languages that polyglot B has. With Thai, polyglot B is very good in Thai, can already communicate in Lao, Isan. And let's say that polyglot B wants to expand his or her understanding of other related languages, like Shan. B speaks Indonesian, but regularly watches movies in Malay, so starting to get better in Malay. Polyglot B speaks Hindi, so wants to learn the Pali because polyglot B loves the Himalayas. Okay, there's some self-biography in here, but my Nepali is better than my Hindi. Also, for trekking the Himalayas, using Tibetan to learn Sherpa in Tamang. If we were talking about greatly increasing numbers, which groups would you focus on? Definitely Slavic, but also Tibetan related. You can get around 30 languages from there. It depends what you call language or dialect, but if you use mutual intelligibility, definitely 30 or 40 languages. Tamangs don't understand Sherpas. When I was trekking just in February in the Solokumba area, I was speaking Sherpa. There was a Tamang, and he's going like this. I told him in Tamang. They didn't understand. There's some words they generally understand, but the origins from Tibetan, so you see how things change, and the grammar is similar. Okay, so polyglot B speaks Tamil, speaks Turkish, and now wants to travel around Central Asia, which I did, by the way, going in the former Soviet Union in 1981. So I went to all these places that you see listed here. So polyglot B knows Farsi, so yeah, I can speak to Afghanis who speak Dari, and of course Tajikis are basically speaking a certain form of Farsi. Let's go to the Bantu languages, so has Swahili and Zulu. So that's one of the biggest group to get a lot of languages from, because you can start from the north and go south. Now, let's go to the next issue, which is pronunciation, the phonetic system. First of all, we have to think in terms of the phoneme. It's a distinct unit of sound which creates different meaning. In order to understand variations in accents and pronunciation amongst our fellow speakers, in our mind we have neural mappings, and that subsume all related sounds that are not important in determining meanings, okay? In other words, they are not phonemes. So gaining the ability to distinguish and produce sounds in new target language that do not have distinct equivalents in one's language is required, okay? So it's increasing your phonetic repertoire. Now, there are such things called brain traps. For example, a violinist playing a violin all the time like this. The two fingers will start to stick together. When you try to move one, you move both at the same time. This happens when you don't differentiate in the movements. And it's the same with the sounds that you hear. They're not differentiated because the difference between these two sounds is not important in terms of meaning. Since the basis of the problem is the absence of differentiation in the auditory cortex, you have to practice with exaggerated differences. He concluded that it's possible to teach anyone to speak a second language without a foreign accent with proper training. Okay, so you restructure your brain when you learn a total language. This is quite interesting study. They looked at native Chinese speakers and Europeans who learn Chinese and those who don't speak Chinese. And the results identified two brain regions, first in the vicinity of the right anterior temporal lobe and the left insula, where speakers of Chinese had significantly greater gray and white matter density compared to those who didn't speak Chinese. Now, importantly, these effects were found both in native speakers and the European subjects who learn Chinese. Okay, so it develops So I wasn't born that way. It's not ethnic. You don't have to do it as a child before you're 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old or 20 years old or 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old. You can do it in your 60s or 70s or 80s. It'll still happen. Not as easy at times, but it'll still happen. You have to put more effort. Phonetic difficulty is defined on the basis greatly depending on the diversity of languages that you already know. So you could argue that languages with greater phoneme variety, consonants, vowels, diphthongs, triphthongs, are more difficult in terms of pronunciation. But it's very hard to find how many there are in a language. For example, in English, I've seen a textbook in Japanese which shows 26 vowel sounds in English. Now we also have to consider tonemes. Okay, so toneme is tones. My subjective view is that highly tonal language that I speak, I would say the order of difficulty for me is Vietnamese, Thai, Lao, and Chinese. I would put Cantonese at the top, but when I speak Cantonese, my tones aren't very good. Okay, what about grammar? Difficulty is very subjective, depends on your experience. So I think it's a mistake to assume that languages that have a lot of inflections, like Slavic languages, Latin, etc., are inherently more difficult than those that don't have any. A well-known assumption is that all human languages are overall equally complex. Chinese, that doesn't have any inflections, but the word order becomes quite important, as well as the aspects in Chinese, in order to express past tense, future, etc. Okay, completeness, non-complete, on and on. Indonesian verbs also do not have tense, but they have a lot of prefixes, suffixes, and cofixes. People all the time say, oh, Indonesian Malay, very easy. Well, it's because you speak simple Indonesian Malay, that's all. If you hit a higher level, you're going to realize the complexity. All right, now writing system. So there's one fairly objective statement for this category, that Japanese and Chinese are the most difficult languages. Now, I argue Japanese is more difficult than Chinese. I studied Chinese literature in Japanese, okay? So I was learning both languages at the same time because there's many more pronunciations of characters in Japanese. More variation. English is a crazy one. I would say it's one of the most difficult amongst Indo-European languages to write. So what is fluency? So fluency is a flow of speech. Fluent speech is smooth, forward-moving, unhesitant, effortless speech. A disfluency is any break in fluent speech, like stuttering. Some monolingual native speakers are not fluent in the only language they know. In your native language or any language you know, can you talk about astrophysics? Are you fluent in economics? The next question is, so what about vocabulary? So a common question is, how much vocabulary do you need to become fluent in a language? Yeah, again, what domain are you going to be speaking about? Fluency is always domain specific. So you need to know the necessary related vocabulary. For example, there are many subjects like neurosurgery, cognitive linguistics, quantum physics, which many people cannot talk about. They don't have the related vocabulary or knowledge. So it's quite possible to speak very fluently about a surprising number of everyday subjects, domains, with a vocabulary ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 words. If you run into somebody who has very good pronunciation, very good prosody, to such an extent that you don't know they're not a native speaker when they first start talking to you. They can talk about many things with a vocabulary of 2,000 words. Like you all, as polyglots, know, when you're speaking a language which you're not so great in, but doing pretty well, you try to control the conversation so that you don't get into a subject where you have to use a vocabulary you don't know. Though an average adult native speaker has an active vocabulary about 20,000 words, Reading Teacher's Book of Lists claims that the first 25 words are used in 33% of everyday writing. First 100 words in 50%. First 1,000 words in 89% of everyday writing. So it's been said that a vocabulary of just 3,000 words provides coverage for about 95% of common texts, such as news items, blogs, etc. So if you ask me how many languages do I speak, here's my answer. It's complicated because, first of all, I'm going to talk about passive and active knowledge, which is very important, right? Because as I mentioned, the first time that I heard Slovak, I understood almost all of it. For somebody who doesn't speak any Slavic language, that's amazing. It's like, oh, you're almost perfect in Slovak. You understand everything they said there. Oh, you watched that movie, you read that book, you read that sign. Passive can be very important. So what I did here was I put in red, medium to high active knowledge and ability, and then blue, medium to high passive knowledge ability. The darker the color, the more ability. Green, some limited passive and active knowledge. In other words, dealt with it some in the past, haven't used it that much.
If you would like to know more about my experience over the past 5 decades, learning and using more than 30 languages around the globe, with adventures in 101 countries so far, then please visit my website, polyglotdreams.com. There you will find my memoir, A Life in 30 Languages, translated in various languages and integrated with audio and dual readers to offer a great way to improve your target languages. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video.